Several weeks ago, I made a video going into detail on the redemption arc of Darth Sion, and I spoke in depth about what constitutes a redemption arc in Star Wars stories and whether or not Darth Sion as a character fulfilled that archetype to any extent, and could be considered a character redeemed by the end of Knights of the Old Republic 2. And while giving examples of redemption arcs in Star Wars stories, instead of using what I think many of you would have expected, which was Revan's redemption, I actually decided to talk about Darth Vader's redemption instead. And I also threw in a little comment that Revan's redemption is actually a really bad example, and some of you in the comments were surprised, some of you were really excited to hear why I thought that, and so here we are with my final video of 2022, and of course it's about Revan. Who else? So if you haven't seen the Darth Sion video about redemption, I highly recommend going to watch that one first before you continue with this one. I'll link it in the top right. But much like that video, we first and foremost need to define what a redemption arc actually is in storytelling. So in the English dictionary, there are two definitions for redemption that are contextually relevant to this topic. So the first is the action of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. And the second definition is pretty much the same. It's a thing that saves someone from error or evil. Now, I do feel like I'm treading some familiar ground with the previous video in this topic, but I feel like it's important to put this across before we actually get into why Revan's redemption arc is not a good one, and why actually it could be considered a kind of storytelling lie by Knights of the Old Republic. So as for what a redemption arc is, to me it is a storytelling device where an evil character shows clear destructive tendencies, and by the end of that story, they offer to it a magnificent moment in where they go against their evil nature and they do something that affects the greater story for the greater good. And if we had to put that definition or that idea side by side with the character of Revan, these two ideas do not correlate. Now, I'm going to do a quick rundown on the entire story of Revan so we can get a clear picture on the character and how he gets from point A at the beginning of his life to point B by the end of Knights of the Old Republic and his supposed redemption. Revan's journey starts as a Jedi wanting to do good by the galaxy. He despises the inaction of the Jedi Order in the Mandalorian Wars, and he goes against his teachers and essentially rallies the Jedi into supporting the Republic during the war. And during the war itself, he begins to become corrupted by the dark side, but he doesn't become a Sith, and he doesn't change his ideology. But he recognizes that he is being corrupted, and as time passes, he realizes the only way to truly defeat this evil is to be willing to stain his own hands with it. So instead of letting go of his corruption and turning away from it, he decides to use it. He then goes on to find the star maps, he goes on to find Malachor, he builds super weapons of mass destructions, and although all of these intents from one perspective could be seen as evil, he sees it as a necessary evil to protect the things that he loves. And in actuality, the whole concept of Revan's fall to the dark side is a real interesting one. I know that many people don't think that Revan fell to the dark side, and a lot of that stems from Krea's statement about how perhaps he never fell. But we have to remember that that is entirely Krea's perspective and not the actuality of events. Now, we do know that Revan did fall to the dark side, but she is very much right in her belief that it was as much of a sacrifice as it was a fall. Revan recognized that he was being corrupted by the dark side of the Force, and instead of turning away, he decides to use it as a tool to achieve his goals. Now, I have a whole video on Revan's fall to the dark side, so if you want to check that one out, I'll also link that in the top right. So back to Revan's journey and his idea of redemption, and Revan leaves the Republic after the Mandalorian Wars is won, and he returns a Sith Lord. Now, as much as many of us don't like this concept, when he left the Republic, his mind was altered by the Sith Emperor. Revan and Malak were both twisted into thinking they needed to find the Starforge and use it to destroy the Republic. But as distance grew between Revan and the Emperor, he misconstrued this command by the time he returned to known space, and his view was he needed to destroy the Republic to save the Republic, which is somewhat what he believed before he was corrupted by the Sith Emperor anyway. Then of course the entire Jedi Civil War occurs and Revan is attacked by a strike team that is led by Bastila. He is then betrayed by Darth Malak, his ship is attacked and he is brought to the brink of death and his mind is severely damaged. And Bastila basically coddles him into a Force bubble to save his life, and a bond between the two characters is created. She then takes Revan to the Jedi on Dantooine, and in fear of what he could do, they reprogram his mind and they give him the personality of a soldier from Duralia. Revan then goes on his adventures with Bastila and the crew, and he functionally believes that he is a soldier from Duralia who is just special. We then get to the encounter on the Leviathan with Darth Malak, and he reveals that no, you are Darth Revan, and Revan decides, well, that doesn't matter, I'm not who I was, but I am who I am now, and he decides to stay on the path of the light side, and he ends up going on to defeat Darth Malak, and he saves the galaxy. Okay, so now we have all of that established, I'm going to give you a quick second to think. Where exactly within this sequence of events is Revan redeemed? Because in my view, I cannot see a redemption arc in that story. So from the moment that Revan is betrayed by Darth Malak on his flagship, the character of Revan that we know is basically dead. His mind, his memories, every facet of who he is locked deep away in the dark regions of his mind. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there is some debate that stems from this, because Kreia, again, in this instance states that she didn't believe the Jedi did actually change Revan as they claimed, but they just stripped away everything and let the original version of him rise to the surface again. Now again, this is Kreia's perspective of events, not the actuality, but even then, this to me still doesn't truly constitute a redemption arc. Now if we did assume the Jedi did change him, by the end of the game he hasn't gone on this adventure to save the galaxy because it was his choice as a person, he has done it because he was programmed into believing that was necessary. The Jedi basically twisted his mind and they put a new version of him inside of him, one that they could mold into their own little weapon, and they sent him out into the great beyond to do their bidding. It's actually really dark if you think about it. And by the end of the game, Revan hasn't miraculously returned. This is actually something that is addressed in the Revan novel, which in my opinion is probably one of the only good things about that book. Even when Darth Malak reveals you are Darth Revan, Revan doesn't miraculously come back. You are still playing as the character that has been formed across the adventure of Knights of the Old Republic 1, not the character of legend from the past. It's only by the time of the Revan novel, where the Jedi exile hands him the mask, does the character of Revan actually return to his mind. All of his memories flood back, all of his original understanding of the Force and understanding of his power floods back into him, and this is why Bastila was so afraid to give him the mask, because she knew there was a risk that the original Revan could return. And from then on, it's at that moment that he decides to balance the two people he became. He embraces who he used to be, but he also stays on the path of who he became. Maybe that could be considered a redemption arc to an extent, but even then, it's iffy, and it's also one of the focal reasons for why his mind was split in the Old Republic. Now, if we do go back to the concept of redemption as a definition, it means to save or to be saved from evil. But when we look at it holistically, Revan was never saved, nor did he save himself. His mind was literally changed into being somebody new. That to me is not redemption. However, let's stop for a moment and consider that Kreia was actually right, and the Jedi were just arrogant fools who proclaimed something that wasn't true, and they didn't actually turn Revan into somebody new as they claimed. They instead just stripped away the surface and allowed the true self of Revan to return. Now, Revan's personality was always one of thinking about the greater good. He was always willing to sacrifice himself to do what he believed was right. Even when he was corrupted by Vitiate, even when he was corrupted by the dark side, he was aware of himself and was aware of what he wanted to achieve as a human being. And that just was the character of Revan. That was Revan's personality. But if you were to take away everything he had learned, everything he had became in that span of his life, and then left an empty husk of a man that still had the same personality, and then said to them, "You're special, go and save the galaxy," would that really constitute a redemption? There was no willingness on Revan's part to be redeemed in either of these avenues of storytelling. By definition, maybe one could argue he was saved from evil, but was he? He was twisted into forgetting who he was in both scenarios, so does that mean you're being saved? I don't think it does. If the Jedi simply took away his memories and left his personality, there cannot be a redemption arc because there is no growth. Remember, in a redemption arc, they really need to undergo some kind of internal growth against the weight of their sins and evils in the past. Revan never does this. And if we are to contain the idea of redemption within Knights of the Old Republic and not the Old Republic and beyond, I really don't see a redemption arc in this story whatsoever, despite the fact that he is constantly considered to be one of the prime examples of a redemption arc in Star Wars. Now, I definitely can see why people would view it as a redemption arc for sure, because on the surface, evil character goes good, saves the day. That is a redemption arc, but that is a surface level redemption arc. But if you are to look at it a little bit deeper and to look at the finer details of the character and the nuances of the story, I think you will find something that is considerably different to what a real redemption arc is. As I mentioned in the previous video about redemption just with Darth Sion as a focal point, Darth Vader is the perfect example of a Star Wars character with a redemption arc. By Return of the Jedi, he has truly gone through internal growth. He has had to challenge his own beliefs himself in so many ways, and by the end, he decides to let go of all of his power, all of his strength, and sacrifices himself to save his son. This in turn reverberates across the grander story. He saves the rebellion and brings the downfall of the Empire. All of this was Darth Vader's personal choice because of the growth he had as a character from, I guess, a Phantom Menace all the way to Return of the Jedi. That is a redemption arc. But as for Revan, I really do think it's a surface level misconception of the internet that has kind of convinced everybody that Revan was redeemed. As a matter of fact, Redeemed Revan is kind of the name people give to the character after Knights of the Old Republic. You have Jedi Revan, Darth Revan, and then what is often considered to be Redeemed Revan. And in regards to the semantics of the video title, does it actually mean that Revan being redeemed is a lie? Well, I kind of believe it is, because Star Wars inherently tries to show Revan in the light of a redeemed character. And it doesn't surprise me that so many people do believe that Revan was redeemed, because that is kind of the message of the story anyway. It tries to put that across. And I do believe that is a kind of deceptive nature of Knights of the Old Republic. It is trying to convince you that the Jedi are the good guys and they saved Revan from himself, and then he decided to be a good guy himself after discovering that he was actually bad. But the nuances of the story really aren't as clear-cut, and I actually think the redemption of Revan in this regard is just more fuel for the fire that the Jedi of that era were just terrible people, and that Krea's entire desire to reforge the Jedi Order was totally justified. Maybe not her actions, but her beliefs in why. Because the Jedi Order of Knights of the Old Republic were scumbags, and I think people are deluded into believing that they were the good guys, because they really were not. But that, ladies and gentlemen, really is a tangent, and it is the topic for a future video. Now, I really do want to know what you guys think as always. When it comes to these kind of topics, it comes with a lot of interesting perspectives and opinions, and I always love reading what you guys have to say and what you guys think. So let me know down in the comment section below. Do you believe that Revan was redeemed, and has this video maybe changed your perspective in any way? Now, before I wrap up this video entirely, I just want to apologize for not making a lot of content over the past few months. Things have been really difficult for me since October. Everything has just kind of gone to hell in my life. And to cap off this really really shitty year. My dog passed away last week. I've had him since I was a little boy. He was 13 years old, and I have just really struggled to find any desire or motivation as of late to do anything. And as I mentioned, this will be the last video of 2022. And I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to start up again in 2023, because I need a break. I need some time to just turn my mind away from everything and to grieve, not just the loss of my dog, and to process all of my pain healthily and to try and grow. And I just want to say that if any of you guys are going through something difficult or you are struggling with something, just know that I believe in you. You've got this, and hopefully each and every one of us can try to do our best to grow and heal from the struggles we've had this year and have a good 2023. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps me out so much. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community, because every day we are getting closer to the KOTOR remake. I'll see you guys in 2023. And I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and a wonderful New Year. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.